Hello, Gajen.
Hello, Ram.
Uh,
Great.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi, great to have you here. So, for our viewers, a very brief introduction to my good friend Gajen. Gajendran Ayyathurai teaches and researches at the Center for Modern Indian Studies, Göttingen University, Germany. Gajen has published on culture, memory, and history of the casteless Tamils in Tamil, English, and German. Gajen's forthcoming monograph is titled Deep Resistance, Buddhism, Caste, and the Marginalized in Colonial India. Today, we would like to talk with him about his research, his work on Ayodidas, and his very novel approach to critical caste studies. Welcome to the Periyar Project, Gajen. Vanakkam.
Vanakkam, thank you.
Yeah. So, can you just start off with very briefly telling us about your current research?
Okay. Right now I am getting into a new project called Globalization of Caste, and this is because I've done field work in the Caribbean, particularly in Guyana and Suriname, and that sort of spurred me to understand that how caste is not anymore South Asia specific. It's gone out in multiple ways about which we don't know. We should not assume that it is a sort of a post-colonial development because of the indentured labor movement across Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. We have both anti-caste and casteless Indians have traveled, as well as people who have declared themselves into some caste categories. They have spread out. So having published something about, what I call immigration against caste, but through fieldwork in the Caribbean, then I got the sort of a stimulation to expand, to understand Indian diaspora studies, and particularly with a focus on globalization of caste. So that is what, I've delivered some talks and beginning to write something. So that's going to be for the next few years, my focus in multiple ways. And what are the forms by which caste has been globalized and across the world. And so that's the current project I'm busy with. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So, I mean, since you brought about the Caribbean and those sort of geographical regions, I'm just wondering, because of late there has been a renewed interest in comparing caste and race. So,
right.
So are you also attempting something like that, or?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking this question. It's very important. In two ways, I would like to approach what you say. Clearly, like race is a birth-based problem. Likewise, caste is a birth-based segregation. As we say, caste is a problem, caste is stroke racism. That's how I write. Likewise, we need to graduate to understand caste stroke casteism. So caste can never be a good. There is no good caste or a bad caste. There is not a good Brahmin or a bad Brahmin. So all the way down. So you cannot call this a good Periyar or a bad Periyar. No, completely problematic. Good untouchable, bad is oxymoron, right? So that way, that is one. So how birth-based segregations across the world, has happened through race and caste, that calls for a deep comparative understanding for us. So in that sense, that's one. So that way, I derive a lot of theoretical and philosophical influence, including from the great intellectual who recently passed away, Bell Hooks. Her phrase "habits of being" stimulated me some 20 years ago. I used to use her book Earning while I was teaching in India, right? So reading Earning helped me to understand how to look at history, culture, religion, economy, and the academy from the point of view of the oppressed, in their own terms, for their own sake. You see, this was me getting into, say, anti-caste intellectuals such as Iyothee Thass. So then the moment I did, then I find the interesting comparative understanding that there is a relevance that we need to, understand how race has operated. And likewise, we can be, through that understanding, it also helps us to understand caste, which has a longer history than race. And interestingly, anti-caste intellectuals such as Jyotirao Phule and Iyothee Thass constantly write about African Americans' struggle. For example, Iyothee Thass in India, who lived between 1845 to 1914. He passed away in 1914, and he talks about underground railroads in the US by which African Americans escaped from the south of the US into Canada. So amazing understanding. So that way, and he sympathizes, and we know, Ghulam Giri of Phule, he dedicated to African Americans and so on. So that way, there is a wonderful connections which we, the academics, are, I think, pretty late to arrive at to understand this. Organic anti-caste intellectuals, anti-race intellectuals have always been together. Like with W.E.B. Du Bois and Dr. Ambedkar have been great friends. They have exchanged letters and they got inspired. W. Du Bois declared about untouchability at the UN only because of Ambedkar's request. So this is this long connection. And thankfully, some of us are beginning to see that. And so both to understand this birth-based oppression on the one hand, on the other hand, how people have struggled and rebelled against and challenged and recovered, recentered themselves. So in that sense, caste and race are important, to social phenomena that we should comparatively understand constantly. It's not, they are not independent in some ways. Yeah.
Perfect. So it appears that you are taking a sort of a very interdisciplinary and an intersectional sort of an approach to your studies, right?
Absolutely.
So is there any sort of a specific theoretical framework which inspires you or which guides you?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking this again, and particularly you using the word intersectionality. In a way, I'm deeply influenced by this African American brothers and sisters contribution, theories of intersectionality, which we have from the 80s. And clearly, what does this term mean? I mean, definitely the people who began this perspective were African Americans. But interestingly, they connected the race question with gender, with class, with religion, multiple other things, with social segregation and multiple other aspects, spatial segregation, all that, urban, rural, and so that sort of triggered me in a very positive way. Why haven't we done that yet, right? And some academics are beginning to drop the word intersectionality now, but I think this anti-caste organic intellectuals have always thought about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the question of culture was not only sort of, unfortunately, some academics talked like that, but it is wrong. That is, they were not only talking about culture, they were connected with religion, they connected with the economy, because caste is, after all, it hits somebody in a very economic way, right? Food, what food do we eat? Where do we live? Or what sort of dress we wear? All of them are determined by this kind of intersectional situation. And then, so you cannot just take one critique of just religion and stop there. Rather, one has to interconnect. When you interconnect, that's what we mean by intersectionality. So in that sense, I'm glad African-American brothers and sisters, academics, started this in the 80s. Thankfully, we are having that tool to unravel caste in a big way. But as we go deep into it, we understand through this term that our organic anti-caste intellectuals, women and men, by the way, women and men, that is how I could arrive at something called critical caste feminism in the early 20th century. Women talking about sexuality. Imagine in 1907 Tamil Nadu, and interconnecting it with religious oppression, economic oppression, educational segregation, all that, you see. So this was actually intersectionality in practice in the early 20th century. When some of the academic, some of the organic intellectuals were just emerging at that time, but women were publishing it in 1907. So that way, intersectionality is a very important theory for us to critique race, critique caste, and the gender situations. And it's very important. I'm deeply influenced by that theoretical tradition. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of these such important organic intellectuals from the ground who approached multiple subjects was this erudite intellectual called Ayodidas. Right? Now, my familiarity with Ayodidas as such is from the works which were published in English in the early 90s. right?
Okay, I
Which
see.
are published in English, right? So
Correct.
by Aloysius,
Aloysius. Right.
Rika, and Rajendra.
Right.
The articles
Right.
came in the EPW and
Right.
those sort
Right.
of works.
Right.
But after that, the next phase of most significant interventions in the English language comes from scholars like you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Right.
Your
Right.
generation of scholars.
Right.
So now I
Right.
might be, what I would like to know is that what is different between these earlier generation of scholars and the new generation of scholars like yourself who have brought some really novel perspectives to Dasar?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again. And very true. In a way, you put it very nicely. Aloysius, Aloysius, the one who opened up the corpus of Pandit C. Iyothee Thass, as he was known, and like I said, it was born in 1985 and died in 1914. So G. Aloysius literally collected this through our personal conversation. Is a good friend, is a intellectually big influence on me, and I know this. And so he literally collected every every Tamilan weekly that was published from 1907 to 1914. So that week it came to an end only because Thass died. Imagine for 7 years non-stop a magazine, a weekly journal being published. So this Thass did amazing, and it's difficult for us to, a few people even doing it now, but he did it. And so Aloysius collected all that, and with all the challenges, and he read through, he edited, and gave us the Tamil as well as English volumes, and that was. But that, reading through it really stimulated me, and you would be interested in, as a Periyar scholar, you would be interested. There is one page that I read in the first volume of Ayodidas, Aloysius edited volume. And then Thass attacks, why do you guys go around granite? He refers to the gods and goddesses statues and systematically demolishes of the irrational aspects of statues of gods and goddesses, the temple structure, everything. This was a very radical intervention early 20th century, right? Probably in 1907 or 1908, and when he was publishing. So this was just incredibly important intervention. So these are the things that we got to know from those volumes that I thought I need to go beyond. And that is when I got into the Tamilan weekly itself. Read through every week, publication, and then very closely. It was very tiring. Halfway through, I was going to give up because it was a very complex Tamil. Ayodidas was inventing Tamil words. We may not have time for me to go into so, but clearly he was inventing things like unmai into unmai, rationalistic rephrasing of the very word. And so that way, etymologically, linguistically, he was the denotation aspects he was reworking to question the connotational aspects. So Periyar term, we know the English term, stigmatized and humiliated. It comes from the Tamil word Periyar. So Thass would interrogate that and say no, Periyar. So that would mean people who interrogate caste. And then he uses the Malayalam etymological connection, parai. Malayalis would say paranya. So speaking. So they spoke against caste. They were. So that way he goes into it. So all these I got to know, and I have many things to say and write in the future. That's because I got into the weeklies very closely, and out of which I could cull out a bit and then brought it into my, the dissertation at Columbia. Like you said, it's definitely one of the first times an organic intellectual has been given the due intellectual rigorous engagement, probably in the West. And so that way it was a very satisfactory effort. And what was one of the things that I understood that was, how Thass was intersectional. For him, caste and gender were inseparable. Amazing, right? And so he had a ladies' column in his magazine. Imagine in 1907, in the very beginning itself, keeping a ladies' column, and women were asked to write. Swatmeswari Ambal was a pioneer in that, right? So she called herself as a universal sister, Sarva Jana Sagodiri. You see, universal. So now we are talking about sisterhood. Here you go, in 1907, Swapneswari Ambal talks about universal sisterhood. And the caste and gender components were inseparable. So they were intersectional, right, to what we discussed before. So that way, these are the things, and out of which I have written, out of what I call critical caste feminism. For me, they were the critical caste feminists, inseparably dealing with caste and gender. So these are some of the new things that I'm beginning to touch. But I am also very happy to hear there are a lot of many young scholars who are working in Tamil Nadu. And maybe some 25 dissertations are going on right now, PhD dissertation in Tamil Nadu on Ayodidas in multiple ways.
Right.
Hopefully those scholars are going to publish more. And one of my pieces is translated in Tamil now, and it's going to be out in 3 weeks. Stalin Rajagam is editing on Ayodidas, and 25 people have contributed. Aloysius is one of them, and my piece also is coming. And so that way things are happening, and hopefully we get some new ideas, new perspective, new engagement on Thass. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is particularly brilliant because I wanted to know how and where do you place Das in the pantheon of anti-caste thinkers from South India? Because I sense that see, Tamil Nadu in specific, right, has a certain sort of a trajectory which opens up with colonial modernity, where we are launching a sort of a critique which is far more radical than which happened in other states. So Das was a very critical and important voice in that. But how do you place him in the larger sort of set of intellectuals?
Absolutely. Yeah. In a way, he was definitely, I think, I'm a little cautious on this because there is a trend which romanticizes Ambedkar in some ways as the beginning and end of all. I have problems with that. Likewise, there are some Periyarists who think like Periyar is the beginning and the end of all, which is wrong. Likewise, Thass also should not be reduced like that. And Thass himself says that in his writings, and in 1907 and so my father was better than me in the critical thinking and all that. My forefathers were better publishers. That kind of, so what he says is that there is a long legacy of anti-caste resistance. It's understandable. The moment somebody calls you, Ram, as a lower caste or an untouchable, you're not going to keep quiet. Immediately you will ask me, how do you say that? How are you different from me? There are certain things. Okay, let's see what we do. I mean, do you know about agriculture? Do you know about paddy? You may ask those questions, right? And if I say no, then I'm actually ignorant. Whereas when I call you as an untouchable, and there it collapses. So in that sense, we find Thass is raising those questions very systematically, and he finds the resistance, anti-caste resistance, a long legacy. And then he himself does the historiographic work of analyzing who were the anti-caste thinkers in the Tamil tradition. And then he goes into Tamil Buddhism. He himself would say, like we call his work as Tamil Buddhism. He says, no, Tamil Buddhism is a long legacy. So that's how and in the 1880s, we find the body Buddhist, Sangam literature, Buddhist corpus is opening up for the first time. In the Tamil circle, we find suddenly, whoa, before Shaivism and Vaishnavism, we've had a long tradition of Buddhism and Jainism. The very word school, Pallikudam, comes from the Jain tradition, right? And we also have paintings still in Tamil Nadu where Buddhists and Jains have been killed, all that we have, brutally by the Shaivites and Vaishnavas. So all this, Thass talks about, and there is a long history of resisting caste. So that's what. But having said that, here comes Thass in a big way. He learns about this Sangam Buddhist corpus in the 1880s and comes up with, till then he was an Advaita person. He was believing in Advaitam, right? Inseparability of the material and the soul, and that kind of a division, body and soul. Those concepts. So he was an Advaita person, clearly interrogating Dvaita tradition. But in the 1880s, once this Buddhist corpus came about, he said, "Oh, whose books are these?" And Mani Megalai is probably the most democratic public related literature that was published then. That is just amazing. So you get to know about ordinary Buddhism practicing Tamils, and so he opens up, whoa, this is a casteless tradition, whereas Vaishnavism, Shaivism are caste-based tradition. And he interrogates all that. Why temple is segregated? Temple for him is not an inclusive space. One of the things we learn from is we don't interrogate how temple is working right now. Another temple is, probably some 38,000 temples are there, ironically, in Tamil Nadu, 38. Yeah. You imagine, and in Tamil Nadu, and it's going to go on. And it's a tragic thing. Now, we don't ask with every temple coming, who is benefiting? Who is the priest? Even a Brahmin woman cannot go into the sanctum sanctorum because she menstruates. All that. Her body is humiliated, right? And then the hierarchy, and the temple toilet is cleaned by the marginalized. So should we have a temple? And so all these questions were, in a way, interrogated by Thass in a big way. So he interrogates temple, all that. The moment he made the shift into Buddhism, he raises these questions. So in a way, for me, Thass is the pioneer of modern anti-caste Buddhism in India. In India. So in South Asia, anti-caste modern Buddhism. Immediately we may say Anagarika Dharmapala, who sort of was there before, right? Sri Lankan, Sinhala Buddhist. But the sad part is Anagarika. I'm planning to write a paper on this, comparing them philosophically, how Anagarika Dharmapala and Thass fell apart. And primarily because Anagarika Dharmapala's Mahabodhi Society, which was established in Calcutta in 1991, was not anti-caste. It was romanticizing. It was, sort of a idealist, a kind of a ritualized Buddhism, which Thass was not for. So for Thass, Buddha was an anti-caste pioneer, not a god to be worshipped. You see? So he was not even for a statue of Buddha to be kept anywhere. Amazing rationality, right? So he was what I call ethical rational Buddhist. So in a way, he was a pioneer of, that way he's a pioneer of ethical rational Buddhism, unlike anybody before, keeping the caste and anti-caste focus at the core. And then again, one of the personally that I could benefit, so you and me, that's how caste works, right? It's supposed to be inevitably personal and collective. So you and me are supposed to belong to some caste, whether you like it or not. And somehow we are supposed to be. Now, through Thass, what was self-emancipating for me was a human could be casteless.
Right.
Because he wrote a big editorial piece called Who is Human? That opened me up. Imagine raising this question, who is human? Right? Not many have raised this in the modern time, modern Indian history. He did the who is human and then demolishes race, caste, gender-based division. So the moment I read that, sitting at Columbia, I said, wow, that's the way I want to be as a human. So that's self-emancipation. I could connect and I could benefit from Thass. In another way, he was a pioneer for us, all of us, whoever is against caste, whoever can feel as casteless, can be part of Iyothee Thass. In that sense, he was a pioneer. Sorry, I went a little roundabout.
No. And there's a particularly important point which you raised, which I want to latch on now. This sort of this name of Anagarika Dharmapala, which you brought about, right? Because see, the Sri Lankan conflict is something which I have been interested in, and I've actually noticed in the literature which I've read on the history of this conflict, we can see that many of Anagarika Dharmapala's followers, they have referred to Tamils in using very casteist terms, So one of the worst terms which they used to refer to the Tamils is Paratamila or Chakili Tamila, right? So, but it's actually very significant. You raised this point that the Ayodidas had this sharp difference with Anagarika Dharmapala, because I think it is important that it should be explored on and recorded at this juncture. I am really thankful that you are doing this now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because I specifically think that Das's legacy of Buddhism as being an anti-caste thought and not just a ritualistic practice is very important to emphasize at this point of time.
Thank you. You're right.
More so because I also think that because there are certain traditions, certain among the Elam Tamils
Ah,
who view
yeah.
Buddhism as such as some sort of an aggressive ideology
Mm,
towards them,
correct.
right?
Correct.
I
Correct.
mean, of course, I do not want to devalue their experiences of suffering at the hands of the Sri Lankan state. It's completely legitimate. But we are
Correct.
talking about historicity over here, right?
Correct.
Because
Correct.
Das imagines that such an anti-caste Tamil Buddhism has existed in the past and
Right.
it is possible in the present also. In
Right.
fact, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm going long with this
No, no,
question.
no, please
Yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
yeah. In fact, I would even say that Das's idea of anti-caste Buddhism might offend the Sinhala Buddhist nationalists even more.
I agree. Very correct. Very
Yeah.
correct. Very correct. Very correct. That way, and that is one side we need to really engage. And then, like you said, romanticizing Buddhism, that is also a tradition now. Unfortunately, this is there very much within some of the Ambedkarite tradition. Putting a halo behind Buddha and a halo behind Ambedkar. This they do in India and the US and so on. I think that is very problematic. And so the moment you ritualize, turn Buddha into a god, and Buddha's own interrogation of concept of God, etc., we are trying to sort of sugarcoat it, which is very wrong. And thankfully, people like Iyothee Thass could see that through, and then, and that's why they said, no more romanticization of Buddhism in the ritual sense, in the religious sense. Rather, in the ethical sense, in the rational sense, we have to take them seriously. So that is their contribution. I fully agree. Yeah, yeah.
So one other this thing important intellectual which from South India is Lakshmi Narasu, right?
Yeah,
So
correct.
how does
Correct.
Das's thoughts relate to that of Lakshmi Narasu?
Right, right. Your voice is breaking. Is my voice breaking, Karthik? No, right?
No, now it's fine. It's fine. I'm able to hear you clearly.
Your voice is breaking. Is it? Does it? Mine is also breaking.
Yours
Is it
is
okay?
clear. Yours is
Okay.
clear.
Okay, good. Okay, so Lakshmi Narasu. Yes, this is very interesting. This is some of the interesting elements. Is Lakshmi Narasu and Thass, they were close friends.
Okay.
And Thass used to conduct a bi-weekly meeting workshop in Chennai, in a place like Rayapeta and so on. So where Lakshmi Narasu was a regular presence, and he used to deliver lectures. So that way, and then by the way, at that time he was a professor of physics. I think it was in Pachapa's college. So he was a very clear rationalist, and in fact, Lakshmi Narasu's book, What is Buddhism, I read at Columbia. I could not find it in India, so I was so happy to see this. And so the title is What is Buddhism? So you will see very clearly Lakshmi Narasu very rationally talking about Buddhism in a very powerful way. So that way, I think that very interestingly, and this is also, by the way, Thass was stigmatized as an untouchable, as a pariah and all of that. But he was clearly interrogating all those categories and rejecting any pejorative, negative category. To talk about the oppressed, he rejected it. But at the same time, this is what another thing we need to understand, that he was always inclusive of people who would join him through anti-caste and casteless sensitivity. So I do not know the caste background of Swapneswari Amba. I do not know the caste background of Lakshmi Narasu and many others. Thass openly writes about some Brahmins who did inter-caste and anti-caste marriages, interreligious marriages. He has a special box item to celebrate such people. Now, so that shows how he was building bridges and he was opening up, and then he was trying to create an alternative caste-free community. That is very important for us to understand. So in the name of resisting caste, we should not get into yet another sort of re-inscribing category. In that sense, we need to re-examine what is the category. Can I speak about myself as a Shudra and fight against caste? I think there are limitations for that. In the same sense, what would the category Dalit, means oppressed means? What does it mean? Can anybody join or no? So how far it could be a positive or a negative concept. So we need to interrogate that. Likewise, scheduled caste category, likewise, depressed caste, whatever, So So that way, I think Thass was, and Lakshmi Narasu was also sort of, they could join hand, irrespective of their past caste background. Here and now they gave up their caste. That's how Thass, Lakshmi Narasu, Swapnil Priyambala, all of them could come together and build a rational, ethical, rational Buddhist community where people could be welcomed. Anybody could be welcomed, irrespective of the linguistic barriers, you know. So that was amazing. So in that sense, Lakshmi Narasu was a pioneer, and no wonder Ambedkar takes him up very seriously, because Lakshmi Narasu published in English. But interestingly, Thass had one or two pieces in English, such as "Who Are Untouchables?" Literally, this is the title of one of Ambedkar's work. So I immediately thought, where did Ambedkar get this title from? And I'm not trying to say that he plagiarized and so on. No. But what I mean is that Thass was publishing in Tamil. Ambedkar would have had the constraint, but thankfully there was Lakshmi Narasu, by which Ambedkar would learn a lot. In a way, I would argue, and interestingly, I did field work, and which is published now, about Tamil Buddhist descendants in Karnataka. I did field work, which is published in English, so it's called Castelessness, which is also translated, which is going to be part of the edited volume. And there I met people who sadly passed away a few years ago, in the 90s. They had met Ambedkar in the 1950s in Nepal, in the World Congress of Religion. And then Ambedkar seemed to have gotten up and said, like, and thanked them, because he had not converted to Buddhism. But these young Tamil Buddhists who were there, he said, I'm still thinking about Buddhism, but here you are, Tamil Buddhism, so on. So that way, we have this long connection through Lakshmi Narasu, Ambedkar got to know about Tamil Buddhism, definitely, and that played a very vital role also. So this is a very interesting, inclusive, ethical, rational Buddhist community, I think, that Thass had established as a sort of a foundation to move in the anti-caste direction. Yeah.
Now, about the legacy of Thass, that's one thing which, I think largely thanks to the interventions of scholars like yourself, I think Thass is getting a more recognition in the academia and in the intellectual sphere.
Right.
But parallelly, we can also observe that there is a interest or a greater recognition given to Thass in the political sphere in Tamil Nadu. For instance, the recent DMK government's decision to install Ayodidas or Mani Mandapam. And there was also another occasion when very recently, about a week or so back, when Muka Stalin, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, presented the books of Dasar to
Right,
the Dravida Kazhagam president. Now this recognition, even though it is late, I think it's welcome, and definitely. But I also wanted to ask you, at the same time, there is another sort of a harmful thing which is happening, which is namely from the Tamil nationalist like Seema. Like the Tamil, I prefer to call them Tamil nativists, because they tend to have this xenophobia towards those who are considered non-native. And they seem to appropriate Das as one of their own nativist thinkers. So at one level, you have the Dalit scholars, Dalit politicians, Dalit intelligentsia, who are, actively defending and promoting the Ayodidas's legacy. Then you have the Dravidian politicians, the Dravidian political figures, who are giving Dasar the overdue recognition. And then you have the Tamil nationalists who are trying to appropriate Das for their own purposes. How do you view this? And
yes, absolutely. It's a very important question we'll all of us have to grapple with. And definitely, I think reducing, we understand the first two trends. The third one I want to grapple with directly. Turning Thass into an ethnographic, identitarian person is extremely wrong. And so that is exclusionary in some ways, and then sort of a vigilantism, which is extreme, goes against his interrogation of dehumanization through caste. And so that is extremely problematic. And here I want to emphasize at the same time something different, and which we have not explored, academics have not explored. This is in a way big problem for anti-caste thinkers. across the board, be it Ambedkarites, Periyarists, or whoever you may, Phuleites and all of that. Something stunning happened when I read very closely Thass. Thass was very sensitive to his understanding that India was a nation of nations. How? Language-based. So, and he was very clear only because of, and by the way, he spoke 4 languages. Okay. He knew Pali, he had mastered, and his descendants, many of them had spoken Pali, and they still speak Pali. I met with them. He knew Sanskrit, and he knew, of course, Tamil and English. So, 4 languages, and in his narration, you find these 4 languages coming back and forth, and quotations and all that. Now, on top of that, he talks about 22 languages, regions of India. And then he calls, each one of those regions should be understood through their own language. Because that's where people's positive memory and history, I'm getting into memory studies now, and that's because of Thass. And so what if caste is an imposition on you wrong, externally, be it of whatever caste you are, it is an imposition, then the question is, how do you see yourself is a very important question that academics are not interested in, right? And the moment you say that you are a Marathi, you are a casteless Marathi, you are supposed to be vernacularly, linguistically, exclusionary, that's wrong. Because if you are a Marathi, if you are a Bundelkhandi, if you are a Bihari, I need to know your language to unravel your own positive memory and history before caste was imposed on you. In that sense, the vernacular language has to be taken seriously. That's also the reason why you don't have an all-India anti-caste movement. It's just not going to happen, right? It's just not what? Through Hindi or to Tamil? No way. So each vernacular region should be taken seriously, and their archives have to be sort of unraveled. Archaeology has to be unraveled. So, Kiradi in Tamil Nadu, for example, archaeologically speaking, we have a clear ancient civilization which doesn't have any marker of caste, thankfully. So archaeology plays a very vital role to talk about a Tamil civilization, which is inclusive at the same time anti-caste, right? So in that sense, archaeology is important, but we should not turn that into a sort of ethnocentric exclusionary thing. So doing that to Thass is wrong. He was not. He respected every language, every region, but wanted each one. And I also said within Tamil, as more and more radical questions come from within Tamil, there would be a lot of problems within the Tamil community. He was open to that because people will try to democratize themselves. The most oppressed will ask the most radical question. And Thass said we should be open to that. So in that sense, these people who are talking about Thass as pure Tamil, Vedachalam Pillai, Maraimalai Adigal, pure Tamil. I mean, that was absolutely casteist, right? I mean, anti-Sanskrit, but deeply casteist, pure Tamil tradition, Now, the fellows who call themselves as Modalayas and Velalars, they are holding up Maraimalai Adigal in a very exclusionary way. Deeply problem. That's why the movement has died and gone, right? So you cannot do the same with Thass. He was a lot more inclusive, and he was appreciative of multiple other languages, and he was connecting local and global. He talks about Japanese women. He talks about St. Louis women in the US. Why would he do that? So he was inclusive, and that's how I think we should look at him. We should not look at it in a very ethnocentric, exclusionary way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gajen. So now, your one very important and novel idea of critical caste studies.
Yes.
I'm now here's a sort of me playing a sort of a devil's advocate over here. The thing is that now the trend largely is to focus on Dalit studies.
Right.
I agree. Because this is my opinion. Is that there are quite a lot of people who tend to assume that caste is a Dalit problem.
Right.
So therefore, studying caste means studying Dalits.
Right.
And this has led to the efflorescence, the flowering of Dalit studies and so on.
Right.
But your vision of critical caste studies seems to be something quite different, perhaps even critical of this trend. So Yes.
I get it. I get it. I'll say, Ram, in another 10 minutes, I would like to wind up to rush
Yes,
for
yes,
the.
definitely, definitely.
So now now the point is, yes, why did I arrive at that? I have a PhD in anthropology and from Columbia University, and I read that. What I found was in the Ivy League of US and elsewhere, the Dumontian framework of caste, caste is sort of an inevitable default structure that everybody has to be put in. And inevitably, it is supposed to be, it's supposed to be what everybody has to be part of this, and nobody can break free from. And that is supposed to be an inevitable social equilibrium. It's all in a balance. I mean, complete nonsense, right? I mean, that's not the case. There's a hierarchy, upper caste and lower caste, and there is this power operating. And in anthropology and other studies, I don't think caste has been interrogated. Caste has not been treated as a problem. That was very uneasy for me all through my education, right from undergrad. Okay, so caste is not a problem. It is romanticized as a cultural identity, right? And our academy has played along. This is deeply problematic one. So because of that, I thought if race is a problem and it is interrogated, likewise, caste is a problem that has to be interrogated. And then, like I said a few minutes ago, there is no good caste, there is no bad caste, there is no good Brahmin, there is no bad Brahmin. I mean, it's pathetic. Like academics like Gayatri Spivak, they have used the phrase like learned Brahmin in a notorious piece called Can the Subaltern Speak? I was deeply troubled when I read as a student. And I was horrified to hear more about it at Columbia. So there she very casually uses a phrase like learned Brahmin. That is contradictory. That is an oxymoron. You cannot be learned and be a casteist. How can a casteist? I mean, if I call myself a Brahmin, I am a casteist. I distinguish myself from you by calling you a non-Brahmin, right? Hierarchy, oppression. So it's a pathetic thing, post-colonial studies. Everybody has romanticized that. And that's where my uneasiness led to, thanks to critical race studies and other traditions, that, whoa, we have to question this. I've never been satisfied with the anthropology of caste and historicization of caste and sociology of caste and the Dumontian tradition. So I fell apart from them. And that's how I could arrive at critical caste studies, where you interrogate caste, you don't romanticize, you reject it, and you also talk about how critical caste institutions have to come about. Right now, the institutions are not open to that. South Asian studies, they don't interrogate caste, right? So because of all that, I find there has to be true critical caste studies. It has got to be a sort of an autonomous, important subfield in South Asian studies. And people have to be recruited into critical caste studies, and there have got to be critical presses and so on. Right now, many of the presses are not open to, you write a piece on Brahminism, you publish a book on Brahminism, it's not going to be published immediately, because the person who, the editors, the copywriters, copy editors, all of them are literally from the privileged groups who are not interested in your work. So this, as a publisher, somebody who's struggling.
Can I quickly put a point, Gajen? This is a very important point, because as you said, if you write something on Brahminism, you are likely not to get published. But if you wrote something about Dalit studies,
right.
So that's why I wanted to highlight that.
Absolutely, right. So in that sense, that way, there is a condescending attitude towards Dalit studies and so on. Oh yeah, Ram is the Dalit, let us encourage, and you will never be called as a historian. You will never be called as a philosopher. You will never be called as an anthropologist. You will be called as a Dalit anthropologist, Dalit historian. So Dalit philosopher, in a way, re-peripheralizing you. That is what I see sitting in the West. So that way, and also this one side, the condescension, South Asian condescension. On the other hand, what does the very term, this I'm going to write about, and so the category Dalit, what does it mean etymologically? What does it mean historically? Why people did not use it, say, 60 years ago? Why are they using it now? What has been the impact? Has it been productive or unproductive? What does it do? Is it inclusive or exclusive? How is it different from depressed classes, a weaker section, all this? So I find a lot of limitations in the very category Dalit. And also, so therefore, through critical caste studies, I not only argue to interrogate caste, that means dislodging caste-based perspectives, the Brahminical, clearly anti-Brahmin, anti-caste, Brahminical, de-Brahminization is at the core of critical caste studies. At the same time, how do you understand the casteless Indians, right? You don't have theoretical tools, yes. That's why I'm beginning to conceptualize philosophically what is castelessness. Who could be a casteless person? Can I be a casteless person? I want to get into that philosophical, cultural, religious aspects and community building. You see? So in that way, the casteless and anti-caste components have to be theorized. As of now, I think the Dalit tradition, Dalit theoretical positions, of course, there are very few only now, and it is also dominated by the Ambedkarian perspective, and they are not open to other traditions yet. So these are some of the sort of limitations that they have, which they need to open up. You cannot, if you are the Dalit thinker, and you've got to be an anti-caste person, and you need to one up a casteless position, and you need to be open to a critical caste standpoint of view. You can't say no to that. And so at a particular time, one should be open to interrogating these categories such as Dalits also, right? So yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much, Gajen. It was really a pleasure to have you here. So now I'll just switch off the recording. Thank you so much for sparing your time, and hope to catch up with you soon.
Absolutely, Ram.